Welcome back to the channel. Today I am reviewing The Emperor's Soul by King of Fantasy, creator of the Cosmere, Brando... This is a novella that clocks in at around 170 pages, depending on which edition you have, but it is included in the Arcanum Unbounded, which any Cosmere fan should own. If you somehow don't know, the Cosmere is Sanderson's fictional universe that connects a lot of his stories together, and the Arcanum Unbounded is a collection of short stories and novellas that all take place in the Cosmere on its various worlds. And the Emperor's Soul takes place on the same world as Elantris, but you don't need to read Elantris first, because this does stand on its own. This is one of the few Cosmere stories that I had left to read before I'm caught up. I still have to read the third Mistborn Era 2 book and The Hope of Elantris, but this novella ended up being one of my favorite works by Brandon Sanderson, and one of my favorite books that I read all year so far. Anyway, this is my spoiler-free review of The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. In this novella, we follow Shay, who is a forger. This means that she can use a type of magic to flawlessly copy and recreate any inanimate object by rewriting its history. Take, for example, a plain old wooden table. A forger can then alter the history and stamp it with a new one that says it was created by a master carpenter, and the table would react by shaping into that specific form. Now, when we begin the story, we find that Shay is condemned to death after trying to steal the Emperor's scepter that was on display in the palace. However, when an assassination attempt leaves the Emperor in a vegetative state, Shay is offered her freedom in exchange to create a new soul stamp that will alter the history of the Emperor so that he no longer is in this state, essentially creating him a soul. Hence the title. Now the problem is that forgery is an abomination to her captors, and she's likely just going to be a loose end that the Emperor's council will be desperate to get rid of. Now, a big reason why I usually don't like short fantasy fiction is because I feel like it's just not enough time to develop a fantasy world and have characters that grow and have depth. But that is not the problem here at all. The Emperor's Soul has a surprising amount of depth to it, and Sanderson even touches on some really interesting themes. The idea of forging a soul brings with it a debate of the nature of a soul, and this is something that Sanderson embraces here, and I found it really fascinating how there's kind of this study of clashing beliefs. Will the Emperor still be the Emperor when he wakes up and he has a new soul? Is a clone just a copy, or is it its own person? It brings up that sort of debate. And he also touches on the nature of art and whether forgery can be considered art or not. And it got me thinking of kind of a modern real-world comparison when it comes to AI-generated art and videos and writing. Even if it's very beautiful art or it's really well written, can it be considered art when it's not made by a talented artist or a skilled writer? I don't know, it just kind of got me thinking about that. But I like the arguments given here, and I appreciate that Sanderson presents both sides in a fairly balanced fashion, and then he gives the readers all the information they need to form their own opinion without too much authorial preference. This is something I've noticed a lot in his writing, and I like it. The magic system is inventive and intricate, and it's something that I would like to see again in a future Cosmere story, because I found forgery to just be so fascinating, and forgery is a fairly complex magic system. I would say it might even be more complex than allomancy from the Mistborn books. I at least think there's a lot of room for it to even grow further and to add more depth to it if we see it again in a future story. So I don't know if that's promised, but I hope so. I hope we see forgery appear again in the Cosmere. The stamps that forgers carve are basically used as a way to tap into the cognitive and spiritual realms, which is terms we're gonna hear later on in the Cosmere. I was surprised to see them in this novella. Now, one appears to need an extraordinary amount of knowledge of the background and composition of the object or person that's being forged in order to make a stamp that will last an extended period of time. Therefore, not only do forgers need to be talented artists, but they also need to be scholars and researchers as well, and I thought this was really interesting. Now, the characters are a pretty big highlight of this novella. Shay, I thought, was a really fascinating, well-rounded, and three-dimensional character, and I really like how she develops this relationship with a different character that is almost her polar opposite, and just seeing how they grow and interact over time and begin to understand each other due to their mutual love for knowledge just made it feel really rewarding. And the character development between these two felt believable to me. This story is doing a lot, and in my opinion, it's doing it successfully. I do wish there was more. It left me feeling like I wanted to learn more about forgery and to learn more about this world and some of the characters. But overall, I just think this was incredibly well done. It is now one of my favorite Cosmere stories ever, and that is definitely saying something. There is a good amount of respect for different viewpoints, as well as some quality discourse, which is why I think that anyone should read this book. I think it's well worth your time. And also, it's all crammed into a short novella, which I think is pretty impressive. I recommend The Emperor's Soul if you are new to the Cosmere and you want to get started, or even if you have no interest in the Cosmere and you just want to read something by Sanderson. I think this is a really great place to start. Anyway, that is my review for The Emperor's Soul. Let me know what you thought in the comments if you enjoyed this novella, and let me know what your favorite Cosmere story is.